take months before the vaccine hits critical mass. So this is the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a long tunnel.
That's right, a long tunnel that's going to include months of crippling shutdowns for restaurants and small businesses. Here in New York City, restaurant owners and workers rallied in Times Square today, lashing out at Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio for their recent decision to once again ban indoor dining in the Big Apple. Even in deep blue New York City, it seems some people are finally growing impatient with the government's heavy-handed response to this pandemic. For more, we turn to iHeartRadio talk show host on 710 WOR, Mark Simone. Mark, great to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
So what do you make of this most recent restaurant shutdown? This comes after they showed, we actually have the data here. Based upon the city's own numbers, restaurants and bars accounted for 1.43% of the spread. You see at the top there, household and social gatherings, almost 74%. Now, I know they'd say they can't shut down households, or at least not yet. They haven't. Cuomo hasn't figured out how to do that, Mark. But shutting down restaurants for 1%, that seems like a bit heavy-handed to a lot of folks who are going to lose their businesses.
It's crazy. I spend my whole life in restaurants, as you know, and I've been talking to every waiter, maitre d', busboy in hundreds of restaurants. Nobody is getting sick. These guys are there 8 hours a day. If they're not getting sick, a customer never will. It's absolutely ridiculous. We're in a terrible position in New York. We've got the two most incompetent leaders ever, de Blasio and Cuomo. And one thing about both of them, they both have in common, they hate restaurants. They don't go to restaurants. They don't go out. They have no idea what the restaurant world is like. And they just capriciously close them down in New York City. If you go outside New York City, to Long Island or to Westchester, their spike is double what it is in New York. And their restaurants are all open inside. So to close New York restaurants is devastating. It's about 400,000 people that work in the restaurant industry and another couple 100,000 that supply these restaurants. So it ripples out into the economy. And when they shut down, they can't pay the rent. So it ripples out into all the landlords in the real estate world. You know, one thing about Rudy Giuliani or George Pataki, our former governor, they used to walk the streets in a crisis. They'd be walking into restaurants, talking to people, getting a feel for things. These two, de Blasio and Cuomo, never leave the house and have no idea what's going on.
Speaking of de Blasio, we have him telling us that we may be facing, in New York City at least, full-on stay-at-home order shutdown. Here he is.
Unfortunately, I don't say it with anything but sorrow, but I do think it's needed. We're going to need to do some kind of shutdown in the weeks ahead, something that resembles the pause we were in the spring. And I think it will be overwhelmingly what we saw then. There may be some adjustments, Henry, but I think it's going to very much resemble what we saw in the spring. Essential work only.
He's talking about a stay-at-home order. He can call it a pause. He can call it a sojourn to Tahiti. He can call it whatever he wants, Mark. He's saying that he's going to tell people that unless you are essential, which in California apparently includes podcast work, so they've got that going for them, but unless you're essential, you have to stay in your home until they say so.
It's unbelievable. You know, the big question is, if lockdowns work, why do we have to do it again? And if it didn't work, why do we have to do it again? It makes absolutely no sense. Why would you lock down all these restaurants? Why would you lock down stores when 300 people are allowed to cram into an airplane, which is a little tube, and they do this 40,000 times a day? That's how many flights we have. People crammed into these airplanes. You know, they'll tell you they got some special air filter system. Well, if that's the case, put that in the restaurant, put that in the stores. It makes no sense at all. As you just showed, most of the problem is home gatherings. If you close the stores, close the restaurants, the result is everybody has to gather at home and go to each other's homes. That's the biggest problem. These are the two most incompetent leaders we've ever had in New York. You know, bin Laden plotted, how could I destroy New York? How could I ruin their economy? Had he only known, just send these two guys in. They'll do it in a couple of months.
Well, that was my next question for you, was going to be, what do you think the long-term prognosis is here for the city of New York? And I think you're going to see this play out. It is, in fact, playing out in some other major areas like San Francisco. Los Angeles isn't quite as bad as New York with this stuff, but it's getting hit pretty hard, too. There are other cities that are having a really rough time with this. But just looking at New York as the canary in the coal mine for everybody else, how do we come back from the destruction of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of small businesses, including restaurants, who knows how much back rent that is, how they're going to collect from bankrupt businesses. It feels like the city is facing a kind of existential crisis even after the vaccine is getting distributed.
Yeah, listen, New York always comes back. The question is, will it be 1 year? Will it be 5 years? And again, all these restaurants, we're going to lose 20,000 restaurants here. We're going to lose a lot of real estate companies, office buildings, skyscrapers. They'll sit empty. The other problem is the crime problem scares everybody away. So people won't rush back here. Tourists won't come. The crime problem keeps them away. In '86, when we had the crash here in New York City and everything was dirt cheap, the Japanese came in and bought up everything. They bought Rockefeller Center. They bought most of Fifth Avenue. So we got to worry when New York City totally is in collapse and abandoned buildings, abandoned restaurants. Who's going to come in and buy up all this? Could be the Chinese coming and snatching up bargains. Somebody should keep an eye on that. And if you got to keep an eye on the Chinese, I don't know that I trust Joe Biden on that.
I wouldn't trust Joe Biden on that one either. Let me ask you, Mark, are you a little surprised that there aren't more Democrats in major urban places like New York and in the major cities who have realized that this really, when I'm complaining about the closure of restaurants and what it's doing to small businesses, this isn't some Trump thing. This is just wanting businesses to be able to operate and wanting people's lives to not be ruined by capricious and arbitrary government power. What do you think it's going to take before they will finally say, before people that aren't Trump supporters, Democrats in the cities say, yeah, we're actually going to join those guys out in Times Square who were protesting? I thought it would be sooner, quite honestly.
Yeah, I don't know. The other problem is you got the crime spike, biggest crime spike in history. Restaurants are all closed. Broadway's closed. There's nothing going on here. So you've had more people leave New York than any other state has ever lost in history. We've lost so many people in New York in this new census. We're going to lose 2 congressional seats. You can't get a moving company in New York right now. There's a 4 to 6 month wait because they don't have enough moving vans. Moving vans are like the new ventilators. They can't get enough of them. So Governor Cuomo, U-Haul Employee of the Year, that's the other problem. And for all of you red states out there, if you're in South Carolina or if you're in Florida, you think, well, that's their problem. All these Democrats are moving to your state and going to take over at some point.
Yeah, we are having the outflow of New Yorkers that could very well change the voting demographics. And you and I both know when Democrats leave the blue state hellholes that are collapsing, they bring the same policies with. They never think maybe we should change things up this time around and vote for Republicans. But Mark, glad you're still here. I'm still sticking it out too at NYC. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your show on 710 WR. Good to see you.